had never believed in love at first sight, but then I met Steve. It was a brisk autumn afternoon in downtown Los Angeles. I was catering for an event, just a small gathering for a wealthy client. The guests were mostly older, elegant types who talked about politics and stocks, things I never cared much about. I was just focused on the food, making sure it was perfect. Then he walked in. Tall, with broad shoulders that suggested strength but not arrogance. His face was rugged, like someone who had seen both the good and the bad in the world. He had dark hair, a 5 o'clock shadow, and a certain way about him that made my heart skip a beat when our eyes met. He wasn't like the others at the party. He looked like someone who had a story to tell. "Are you the chef?" he asked, his voice deep and warm. I nodded, wiping my hands on a napkin. "Yes, I am. Would you like to try some of the appetizers?" He smiled, his eyes lighting up. I'd be foolish not to. He took a bite of a small canapé I'd made and closed his eyes for a moment. "Wow. This is incredible." I felt my cheeks warm. "Thank you. I've been doing this for a while." "I can tell," he said, his smile wide. "Steve." "Elena," I replied. We talked for a little while, about the food, about the event, and about nothing in particular. His presence was magnetic, but I didn't think much of it. He was just another guest at another event. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something about him. Something that made me want to get to know him. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I saw him again. This time, I was at a restaurant opening where I was hired to help with the menu. I didn't expect to see Steve there, but there he was, sitting at the bar with a few friends. He caught my eye and smiled, raising his glass to me. I walked over, pretending I wasn't already grinning like a fool. "Fancy meeting you here," he said, his voice smoother this time. I had a feeling we'd cross paths again. "I guess it's fate," I said, half joking but feeling the truth of it in my bones. From there, we started seeing more of each other. He would show up at the events I catered, or I'd run into him on the rare occasion I had a night off. Every time, it felt like the universe was pushing us together. He told me he was a firefighter, a second in command at a station in the city. I thought that was fascinating. He was tough, yet kind. Dedicated, yet warm. Everything I had never known I needed. 3 months later, we started dating. It felt natural, like we had always known each other. The more time we spent together, the more I realized this wasn't just a passing fling. This was real. 2 years passed before he proposed. It was on a quiet evening at my apartment. He had made a simple dinner, nothing extravagant, just pasta and wine. I had been so busy with work, I barely noticed the quiet intensity in the air that night. But as we finished eating, he took my hand, looked me in the eyes, and asked me to marry him. "Will you be my forever, Elena?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. I said yes without hesitation. Our wedding was beautiful, intimate, just close family and friends. Steve looked incredible in his uniform, his eyes glistening with love. We made promises to each other, to build a life together, to face whatever came our way. We moved into a small but cozy house in the suburbs of LA. It wasn't much, but it was ours. And as the months passed, We started talking about the next chapter, having a baby. We both wanted to be parents, to start a family. The thought of it filled us with hope, but we both knew it would take time. Life was good. Steve had recently been promoted to the second in command at his fire station. It was a huge deal. He was more dedicated to his job than ever, working longer hours, responding to more calls. But even with his busy schedule, we made time for each other. Every morning before work, he'd make me coffee, and I'd pack his lunch. Evenings were spent in front of the TV, our fingers intertwined. Meanwhile, my career as a personal chef was growing. I had a steady stream of clients, wealthy, high-profile ones. My schedule was packed, and I was constantly bouncing between events and private dinners. The work was demanding, but I loved it. Cooking was my passion, and it felt like everything was falling into place. I was on the verge of something big. But as Steve's career flourished, mine did too. And as much as I was proud of everything we were achieving, I began to feel the distance between us. His late nights at the station, the weekends he'd spend working overtime, it was all starting to take a toll. We both wanted the same things, but somewhere along the way, we stopped being the couple we had once been. We were still married, still living under the same roof, but there was an emptiness that neither of us knew how to fill. Steve's absence was becoming more than just an inconvenience. It was suffocating. We had always been a team, partners, not just in love, but in life. But now, it felt as if I was carrying everything on my own. I would wake up to the empty side of the bed, make breakfast for one, and go about my day as if everything was fine. I buried myself in work, catering for the endless stream of events and private dinners that had come my way. Cooking had always been my escape, my sanctuary, but lately, it felt like I was doing it just to fill the silence. Even when Steve was home, he wasn't really there. His mind was elsewhere, on the latest emergency, on the phone calls from the firehouse, on the next fire drill or rescue mission. The shifts were long, and the tension between us was palpable. The small moments we once cherished, dinners together, quiet evenings on the couch, became scarce, replaced by the cold reality of his constant absence. I would try to talk to him, to share my day, but it always felt like he was somewhere else. His mind was elsewhere, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get through to him. The distance wasn't just physical, it was emotional, too. He would come home late, too tired to speak, his body drained from the adrenaline of the day. And I was there, but not really seen. And the guilt. There was guilt, too. Guilt because I missed him, and guilt because I resented the job that kept pulling him away from me. I knew it was part of who he was, but I couldn't ignore the ache that had settled deep in my chest. I wanted him needed him. But he was so busy saving everyone else, he was forgetting about the one person who needed him the most. One night, after yet another late shift, Steve came home around 2 a.m. He had that look on his face, the one that said everything and nothing all at once. He was physically home, but mentally, he was already gearing up for the next call. He kissed me on the cheek, his lips cold from the night air. "I'm sorry, I know it's late," he murmured, still trying to shake off the weight of his shift. I smiled faintly, but I could feel the exhaustion creeping in, not just in him, but in me, too. "It's okay." I stopped, feeling the words catch in my throat. "I miss you," I wanted to say, but I couldn't get the words out. Instead, I hugged him tighter, as if I could hold on to the man I had fallen in love with, the one who had once made me feel like I was his entire world. But lately, it felt like I was holding on to nothing. I wanted to blame his job, to resent the firehouse, to demand more of him. But I knew better. This was his calling. He loved it. He was proud of it. And I admired him for it. But that didn't stop the loneliness from seeping into my bones, didn't stop the quiet sadness from settling over me when I would lie in bed alone, wondering what had happened to the couple who used to laugh at silly jokes and plan their future together. Instead of us planning a future, it felt like we were just surviving, existing in parallel lives. And all the while, I tried to keep busy, throwing myself into my work even more. Cooking became both a balm and a barrier. It filled the empty spaces in my life, but it also kept me from facing the truth. The woman I was before, the woman who was full of laughter and dreams, seemed to be fading. And that's when Max came into the picture. At first, I told myself it was just a client relationship. He was charming, yes, but he was just another wealthy businessman looking for a personal chef. But something changed. He started texting me more, inviting me to events, reaching out outside of work hours. And as the weeks passed, I found myself looking forward to those messages, his attention, something I had been missing for so long. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't help it. I was starved for connection, for someone who truly saw me, not just my job or my responsibilities. And Max. He saw me. But it didn't feel like cheating, not yet. Not when Steve was already miles away, emotionally and physically. And maybe that's where I went wrong. Because in the end, the boundaries I'd drawn for myself began to blur. Everything had been so quiet for so long, but now, it was anything but. The silence between Steve and me was deafening, and Max, with his soft words and attentive nature, was the only sound I could hear. I should have stopped it before it went too far. I knew that. But I didn't. And the longer it went on, the harder it became to turn back. But all of that would change soon. Max was one of my most frequent clients. He was 29, successful, and absolutely charming. He had this presence about him, a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. When he hired me for an event, he made it clear he admired my work. He praised every dish, every detail. I couldn't help but notice the way he looked at me, the way he seemed to hang on every word I said. It started innocently. We talked more about food, about our passions, our lives. He told me about his business ventures, his travels, and I shared my love for cooking. Over time, I started to look forward to our conversations. He had a way of making me feel seen in a way that had been missing for so long. Steve was always working, always absent. And Max, well, Max was there when I needed someone to talk to. I told myself I was just being friendly. But I knew deep down that something was changing. Something I couldn't control. The thing about Max was that he was everything Steve wasn't, at least not anymore. He was present. Every time I saw him, I felt seen, noticed in a way that I hadn't felt in a long time. With Steve, it was like I was a ghost, lingering in the background while his mind was always elsewhere. But with Max, I didn't have to fight for his attention. He listened. He engaged. There was a certain warmth to him, a way of making me feel like I mattered. It wasn't just the way he complimented my cooking, though that always made me blush. It wasn't even the way he would always ask about my day, the little things that showed me he was paying attention, not just because I was his chef, but because he genuinely cared. It was more than that. Max had a way of making me feel important, of reminding me that I had value outside of my job. He noticed the things that mattered to me, the little details that Steve used to notice but had long since forgotten. He would text me after an event, not just to thank me, but to tell me how much my food had impressed his guests, how they had talked about it long after they'd left. I'd find myself looking forward to his messages, replaying his words in my head. And when I couldn't help but share something personal, he would respond with just the right amount of empathy. There was an ease with Max, a fluidity in our conversations that I hadn't realized I'd been craving until it was already happening. The dinners he invited me to were always casual, yet I couldn't help but notice how he would watch me, his eyes lingering a little longer than necessary. He was charming, yes, but there was something deeper, something unspoken between us. Every glance, every smile, every laugh felt like a thread weaving us closer together. I tried to brush it off. He was just a client, after all. A friend, maybe. But deep down, I knew it was something more. I found myself dressing up a little nicer when I knew I'd be seeing him. I caught myself smiling before I even opened the door, my heart racing slightly when I heard his voice. It was ridiculous. I was married, after all. I loved Steve. Or at least, I used to. But the more time I spent with Max, the more I felt like I was rediscovering a part of myself I had forgotten. The part that had once been full of dreams, of excitement, of wanting more than just the routine that had become my life. And the worst part was, I didn't know how to stop it. Max was kind and gentle, and he seemed to understand me in a way that no one else did. He was everything Steve couldn't be at that moment. He was here, present in my life. And that's what I started to crave. I would tell myself over and over that I wasn't doing anything wrong. That I was just being friendly, that it was just about food, about business. But deep down, I could feel the pull, the growing attraction, something that I couldn't easily ignore. One evening, after a particularly long and exhausting day, Max invited me out again. This time, it was just the two of us, no business attached. I know you've had a tough week, he said, so I thought I'd take you to a place where you could just relax. No work, no pressure. I agreed. It wasn't like I had much to look forward to at home. Steve wouldn't be back for hours, and even when he was, we both knew the routine, him, tired and distracted, me, left to fill the silence with whatever I could find to occupy my mind. When Max picked me up, he greeted me with a smile that seemed to light up the night, and as we drove to the restaurant, the conversation flowed effortlessly. The world felt lighter with him beside me, and for a brief moment, I forgot about everything else, the emptiness, the silence at home, the growing chasm between Steve and me. Over dinner, we talked about everything and nothing. He shared stories about his travels, his business ventures, and his childhood. I listened intently, laughing at his anecdotes, feeling lighter with every passing moment. It was strange how easy it was to be with him. It was a relief to simply be. And yet, beneath the surface, a quiet tension simmered, unspoken but undeniable. When he looked at me, I could feel his gaze, steady and intense. I tried not to read too much into it, tried to ignore the flutter in my chest when he touched my arm, just a brush of his fingers against my skin. But I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't deny that there was something there. Something that made me feel alive again, something I hadn't felt in a long time. At the end of the night, as we stood outside the restaurant, he turned to me, his eyes holding mine for a moment longer than necessary. "I'm really glad we did this," he said softly. "I've enjoyed getting to know you, Elena. More than I thought I would." I smiled, feeling my heart skip a beat. "Me too, Max." He reached for my hand, and I didn't pull away. For a split second, everything else faded into the background. It was just me, and him, and the quiet hum of the city around us. The world felt so much smaller in that moment. But then, like a splash of cold water, reality rushed back in. I had a husband. A life that, no matter how distant it seemed, I was still tethered to. And yet, here I was, standing on the edge of something I knew I shouldn't be entertaining. As Max leaned in slightly, I felt the pressure of the moment, the unspoken invitation in the air. He was waiting for me to make a move, to say something, anything. But I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I stepped back, clearing my throat. I should go home. Steve's probably waiting for me. Max didn't push. He simply nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. Of course. Another time, then. I left the restaurant that night with a strange sense of guilt tangled up with a rush of exhilaration. It wasn't just about Max, about the pull I felt toward him. It was about something much deeper, something I wasn't ready to face. And as I lay in bed that night, the silence between Steve and me felt more suffocating than ever before. As the months passed, Max and I grew closer. He began recommending me to his friends, encouraging them to hire me for their events. I became a part of his circle, attending dinners and gatherings, where he would always make a point to sit next to me. I tried to tell myself it was just business, just networking. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. The friendship began to blur into something more. We would text late into the night about food, about life, about everything and nothing at all. And every time my phone buzzed, I felt a small flutter in my chest. But the truth was becoming harder to ignore. I was falling for Max. The night Steve found the messages, everything changed. I had no idea what had hit me until I heard his voice, strained and cold, calling my name from downstairs. "Elena, we need to talk." My heart dropped into my stomach. I hadn't seen him like this before, not in the 3 years we'd been married. I had been so careful, so convinced I could keep this part of my life separate, but now, the truth was out in the open. I hurried to the living room, wrapping a towel around myself, still damp from the shower. Steve was standing by the kitchen counter, holding my phone in his hand, his face pale. His eyes, usually so warm and steady, were wide with disbelief. "Steve, what's wrong?" I asked, even though I already knew. His voice was low, but there was a hard edge to it that I hadn't heard before. "You tell me, Elena." "Who's Max?" I froze. His question felt like an accusation, and for the first time in our marriage, I didn't know how to respond. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I could feel the blood draining from my face. He waved the phone in front of me, his fingers gripping it so tightly that I could see the strain in his hand. The texts, Elena. The late-night messages. The way you talk to him like he's the only person in the world. Is this what's been going on while I've been working my ass off to keep us afloat? My mind scrambled, trying to find a way to explain, to make it sound like nothing more than a friendship gone too far. But I knew it wasn't just that. I couldn't lie to him. Not anymore. My voice cracked. I didn't mean for it to happen, Steve. I never wanted to hurt you. He shook his head, his jaw clenched tight. Hurt me? Elena, you've been lying to me. You've been emotionally cheating on me for months. His voice cracked, the pain in his words stabbing through me, deeper than any physical wound could. I stepped forward, trying to reach for him, to apologize, to make him understand that it wasn't intentional, that I didn't want this, but he took a step back, his expression hardening. Don't. Just don't. His words, the way his body had recoiled from me, it hit harder than I ever thought it would. I had imagined this moment in my head 1,000 times, but it never felt like this. It never felt like the walls around us were collapsing, crumbling into nothing. I tried again, desperately, almost pleading, "Steve, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I've been so lonely, and Max, he was there, and I." He cut me off, his voice rising, an edge of anger cutting through his pain. Asterisk Max, asterisk you've been talking to him like he's the only one who matters. All the while, I've been here, working, sacrificing everything to give us a life, to give you a life. And this is how you repay me? His words echoed in my ears, each one like a slap to my face. And yet, even as I felt the weight of everything I had done, I couldn't shake the emptiness that had driven me to Max in the first place. I wasn't just betraying Steve, I was betraying myself, too. And then, as the silence stretched between us, I saw the pain in his eyes. The hurt that was too deep to cover, too real to ignore. "Do you love him?" Steve asked, his voice barely above a whisper, the rawness in his tone taking me off guard. It felt like he wasn't just asking about Max, he was asking about everything we had, about everything we were. I didn't know how to answer. Because, in that moment, I wasn't even sure what love meant anymore. I loved Steve once. I knew I did. But somewhere in the distance, somewhere in all the hours apart, I had lost touch with that love. And now it was too late to fix it. The damage was done. "I don't know," I whispered, my voice barely audible. And I hated myself for saying it, but the truth felt like a bitter pill I had to swallow. Steve took a deep breath, stepping back further. "I can't do this, Elena. I can't keep living like this." The words landed like a ton of bricks, and suddenly, the house felt too small, too suffocating. The silence was overwhelming. The weight of everything between us was more than I could bear. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, paralyzed, with nothing but the sound of my own broken breath filling the emptiness. I sat down on the couch, my heart in my throat, knowing that everything was about to unravel. and I was the one who had set it in motion. Steve confronted Max. I heard it all, his rage, his hurt. He found him at the restaurant, and things escalated. I never learned the full details, but I know that Steve wasn't the man he used to be after that. And neither was I. I couldn't stay with him after everything that had happened. The trust was gone, and our dreams of having a family seemed like a distant memory. Steve and I tried to salvage something, but it was too late. We both knew it. I filed for divorce. And just like that, the life we had built together crumbled. We never had that baby we talked about. And somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I wonder sometimes, if I had chosen differently, would things have been different? Would we have been able to overcome the distance, the silence? Would we have had a future together? But I'll never know. And now, all I have are the memories of what could have been.
If you like this story and felt connected, please subscribe. Thanks for watching Gaby's Cheating Stories. See you on the next one.